What up, YouTube? So over the past couple of weeks, I've been getting asked by a number of people, both on and off YouTube, how I do my film scanning. So this has changed a number of times over the years. I've found some things that worked really well for me, some things that didn't work super well for me. So I kind of want to go over what I've done in the past and what I'm doing right now, because I think that my workflow right now and what I'm doing is working really well for me, and it's definitely something that I think you guys would find valuable. So just for a little bit of context, when I first started shooting film, the way that I scanned my negatives was just with a traditional Epson flatbed scanner. I would scan them on the flatbed. It worked really great because it gave me awesome high resolution images. However, each scan would take literally more than a minute to just do the scan, and I would have to do that for, if I was shooting 35mm film, 36 different negatives, which, I mean, just do the quick math on that and it takes forever to get that done. And after I was doing that, I was importing it into LightRoom, where I was then exporting it into Photoshop, where I would use the Color Perfect plugin to reverse the negative into a positive, and then I would pull it back into Lightroom to make my final color adjustments and edits and things of that nature. So just doing the math on all of that, it took me like 2 to 3 hours per roll of film to get my film to look exactly how I wanted it to look. So that just didn't really make sense for me and the amount of time that I have to do this. So I moved into scanning my film with thedarkroom.com. I would send my film out to them every couple of weeks. They would develop it, they would scan it, and they do a really good job. I really like what they do. However, if you want to get super high resolution scans, you need to pay for their super scans, which I believe is like $8 extra per roll, which again, doing the math on that, financially doesn't really make sense, because if I was sending them 8 rolls of film, I believe that the scanning or the developing costs like $12 plus shipping, plus the $8 for the super scans. It's like $20 a roll. So if I send out 5 rolls, that's $100 for that to be done. So I've been looking for like a happy medium where I can do the scans myself, but have it not take a super long amount of time and also save a couple bucks while I'm at it, because I want really high resolution scans and I want to have creative control over the color corrections and all of that stuff, but I don't want to spend $100 every single time that I need to get this done. So what I've begun doing is actually performing the scans with my camera, the Panasonic G9, and a macro lens. This lens right here is the Olympus 60mm f2.8. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But what I've begun doing is doing all the scans just with my camera and then using Lightroom as the only software platform to make adjustments in. So I'm not pulling images from Lightroom to Photoshop to Color Perfect and then back to get it to look the way that I want. I'm actually able to do all of my adjustments inside of Lightroom now with a piece of software called Negative Lab Pro. So I'm going to talk all about that right now. So first of all, before you can do this, you're going to need to gather a couple different supplies. Some of them that you might already have and some that you might need to buy, but none of these are super expensive. The first one is just an LED light box. It's literally just a square box that you plug into the wall and it emits just bright LED light. So you can place your film on top of it, which I'll show you in just a minute. You'll also need something that you probably already have, a tripod. Any tripod will work. I use a MiPhoto tripod. It was like $100. I bought it like 2 or 3 years ago and it works perfectly for this. And then finally, you will need a film scanning mask. You can get a film scanning mask for anything, whether it be a large format, 35mm, medium format, which this is, and they work perfectly for all the different formats of film that you might be shooting. The last thing that you're going to need is a digital camera with a macro lens so that you can get nice and close to the film plane to take those pictures really up close. I use the Panasonic G9 and the Olympus 60mm f2.8 lens, and the reason that I use this camera in particular is because it has a high resolution mode that takes like 7 or 8 different shots by moving the sensor around, and then it stitches them all together to create an 80 megapixel file, which is great for things like medium format that just inherently have a higher resolution. However, you definitely don't need a camera that has those capabilities. You can use any camera, whether it be Fuji, Canon, Panasonic, whoever, as long as it can take digital photos in a raw format, it's gonna work perfectly for this process. The very first step is gonna be to plug in the light box and put some of your film into your scanning mask. So I just took literally the first 2 frames that I ever shot on my Hasselblad camera and I put them into the scanning mask. You're gonna want to, before you start scanning anything, make sure you blow it off. This is just one of those like rocket blowers. Helps you blow all the dust off of the film scanning mask and also off of the light box, just so that when you make the scans, you want to make sure that there's no dust that's going to end up being in your images. Once you've done all that, plop it down, and you're ready for the next step. This next step is where things start to get a little bit tricky because you need to be able to position your camera in a way that it's angling perfectly down on the film mask so that it's perfectly level and perfectly even. Some tripods are better than others at doing this. My tripod in particular is really bad at this, so I kind of have two of the legs extended out and one of them not as extended out. I don't know, I'm able to kind of finagle it to do its thing, but I should be a testament that you could use pretty much any tripod to get this done. This works okay. Eventually I might buy a different tripod in order to make it happen a little bit easier, but I've used like 2 or 3 different tripods at this point with it, and none of them are perfect at it, but you can pretty much figure it out with any tripod. The one thing I do want to note is that you want to make sure that the camera is perfectly level with the film plane. So what I do is I use the Compass app on my iPhone, and I set my camera right on the back of it because the Compass app has like a gyrometer built into it, and you can tell whether or not something is perfectly level when you're using that. So I put that on it and I make sure that the camera is 100% level before I start taking the shots. And also, by the way, this is not the camera that I usually scan my film with. I use my Panasonic G9, but because I'm filming with it right now, I'm just using this camera kind of as a mock-up. One of the best parts about this process is just how quick it is. Like I said earlier, when I was scanning with an Epson scanner, it took me like several minutes to just do one scan. With this, it happens literally this fast. You take the scan, you move it on to the next one, you take another shot, you move it on to the next one, you take another shot, and pretty much as fast as you can load your film into one of these scanning masks is as fast as you can perform your scan. So it's so much more efficient than doing it on an Epson scanner. The last thing I want to note is that when you're focusing on the film plane itself, make sure that you focus on the actual film grain rather than the focus point of the photo. It makes sure that when you do that, that the picture is evenly focused across the entire image. And oftentimes when you just try to focus on an object rather than the actual film grain, you'll find that the image doesn't come out as sharp as possible. And also in terms of camera settings, I usually shoot at least f5.6 or above. I'll probably shoot at like f5.6, 6.3, or maybe even 8. And I always shoot with a self timer on the camera. So I'll set the camera up to do like a 2-second timer so that I press the shutter button, it waits 2 seconds, and then takes the photo, just to make sure that there's no shake in the image whatsoever, and so that it comes out as sharp as possible. So now it is time to begin digitizing our film. The very first thing that you're gonna need to do is go to NegativeLabPro.com, which is the website where you'll download the plugin for Lightroom that's going to allow for you to digitize this. So I believe that you can get on NegativeLabPro.com a completely free trial that allows for you to try it out for a little bit. But if you want to buy it and get the full license, I believe it's like $100. I'll link all of this down below so that you can have access to it as well. But once you have all of that software downloaded and completely installed, which they provide you all the installation instructions, so I'm not going to include this in this video, at that point, then we can go into Lightroom and begin taking this negative that we just took a photo of and turning it into a positive. All right, now that we've imported the photo into Lightroom, we can take the steps necessary to digitize it. In the top right hand corner, you can see the settings that I used for the image. I used my 60mm macro lens at f/5.6 for my aperture and 1/80th of a second for my shutter speed. That's like my typical settings that I do or use for scanning film. In the top left hand corner, you can see the resolution of the image. It's like a 10,000 by 7,000 resolution, meaning that I took it with that high resolution mode on my Panasonic G9 that I was talking about earlier, which is really great for these medium format negatives. Like I said earlier, you don't need this to scan film, but it's just really nice to have when you're scanning bigger negatives. So the first step that we need to take in order to digitize this film is cropping the image and changing the white balance. So because it's a 6x6 negative, I'm gonna take it, I'm gonna change it to a 1:1 cropping ratio, and I'm gonna crop it in a little bit. You wanna make sure that the angle is perfect. Bring it in a little bit tighter. You wanna get in almost all the way, but you don't wanna crop in all the way right off the bat. Because once you crop it in like this, the next thing you're gonna do is take the white balance dropper and you're gonna bring it to the empty part of the film strip right here, and you're gonna change the white balance according to that so that you can get the colors perfect. After that, we are going to continue cropping it in until it's pretty much perfectly lined up and looks just like that. All right, and now this is where Negative Lab Pro, that piece of software, comes to play. How we initiate Negative Lab Pro is by pressing Control and N on our keyboard, and it brings up this little dialog box on the right-hand side. So as you can see, there's a couple different settings. The color model gives you the ability to change sort of the scanning simulation. Frontier is the default, and I've always used that. I've never really tried anything else, but if you use this, feel free to try out the other simulations. Frontier works great for me, so I haven't really experimented with anything else. So I'm gonna click Frontier, and pre-saturation determines how much saturation they apply to your image. I really like my photos to be super colorful, so I always use 5, which is the highest one. I'm gonna click on that, and once that's done, we're literally just gonna hit convert negative. We wait a couple seconds for it to load, and boom, it's converted. There's our image. And as you can tell, it's a little bit overexposed right now, and the colors are a little bit off. There's a little bit of a green tint to it. So how we fix that is with just a couple really simple steps. Auto color and auto density do a really good job of making these adjustments automatically to your photos. Sometimes you need to make adjustments past them, but we'll talk about that in a moment. First thing I'm gonna do is auto density, which, as we can see right here, sometimes you need to click on it and then click on something else in the pane in order for it to actually happen. As you can see, it changed the settings pretty significantly and it looks way better now. We're also gonna do auto color because you might notice there's a little bit of a green tint to the image. When we click on that, again, click on something else, it brings a little bit more warmth and more magenta into the image. Additionally, in Negative Lab Pro, we can make all sorts of adjustments to the negative. So if we want it a little bit darker, pull down the brightness. If you want to adjust just the highlights, pull that down. That might look a little bit better to you. I personally like it like this. But the one thing that I do notice is that there's a little bit too much blue in the image, or cyan in the image. So I'm going to pull it a little bit more towards the red, just like that, to adjust that a tiny bit. And I'm also gonna take this and pull a little bit of the yellow out of the image. And I think that that gives it a really even look across the image. And I think that looks super solid. So yeah, that right there is pretty much all of my steps to digitize my photos. Oftentimes what I'll do if I wanna make additional adjustments is I'll click on this TIFF copy button, which gives you the ability to now export a TIFF version of the photo so that you can use all of the LightRoom adjustment sliders to make adjustments to it as well. So now that we export it, or when we hit apply, it exports the file as a TIFF copy, still within LightRoom. So as you can see, it's generating a positive image as a TIFF file. If we go down here, we can now see that this is our TIFF version. So what we can do is we can go in and make our standard adjustments using all of the LightRoom tone curves and things of that nature. I really like using the tone curve, and you can't use it with a negative file, as you can see. Here, I'll show you. If we try to make adjustments to the tone curve right now, it just totally gets all jacked up because the underlying image actually isn't a positive, it's a negative. So the way that the negative reacts to tone curve adjustments is just completely different. So we need to export it as a TIFF like I just showed you. So we go into the TIFF, and I usually, for all my photos, add just a little bit of an S-curve to add a little bit of contrast into the image. So I'm literally just gonna do this, adds a tiny bit of contrast, and that is pretty much it. That right there is exactly how I digitize my negatives. There's a ton more positives and benefits that come from the Negative Lab Pro software. It can actually allow for you to batch process images. So if I want to apply these exact same settings to say 20 or 30 different images that are all negatives, I can do it pretty much instantaneously. I don't experiment a ton with that. I like doing each of my images individually because I like to have a custom look to each and every one of my images, but it's absolutely something that you have the option to do if that's something that you want to do in order to expedite your digitizing process even more. So that right there is my entire film scanning workflow. This process has been an absolute game changer for me because it's given me the ability to have extremely high resolution scans, but it's also given me the creative control that I want over the entire scanning process. Oftentimes when I would get scans from the lab or from my scanner, I wouldn't have as much control over the way that the colors looked in my images. Because of the way Negative Lab Pro works, having all of the changes made inside of LightRoom, I can get my images to look however I want them to look, which is an absolute godsend. I love how this works, and ever since starting doing film scanning this way, it's just been an absolute game changer for me. I hope you guys got as much value from learning about this as I did. This whole process is amazing, like I said, and I've really been enjoying doing it over the past couple of months. If you enjoyed the video, or even if you just learned something today, please hit that thumbs up button below. And if you want to see more content from me, I make videos like this every single week, please hit that subscribe button as well. Thank you all, as always, for watching my videos. I appreciate it big time, and I'll see you next week. Peace.